Fiddler on the Roof is a musical with music by Jerry Bock, lyrics by Sheldon Harnick, and book by Joseph Stein. Set in the Pale of Settlement of Imperial Russia in 1905, it is based on Tevi and his daughters and other tales by Sholem Aleichem. The story centers on Tevi, the father of 5 daughters, and his attempts to maintain his Jewish religious and cultural traditions as outside influences encroach upon the family's lives. He must cope both with the strong-willed actions of his 3 older daughters, who wish to marry for love. Each one's choice of a husband moves further away from the customs of his faith, and with the edict of the Tsar that evicts the Jews from their village. The original Broadway production of the show, which opened in 1964, had the first musical theater run in history to surpass 3,000 performances. Fiddler held the record for the longest-running Broadway musical for almost 10 years until Grease surpassed its run. It remains Broadway's 16th longest-running show in history. The production was extraordinarily profitable and highly acclaimed. It won 9 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, Score, Book, Direction and Choreography. It spawned 4 Broadway revivals and a highly successful 1971 film adaptation, and the show has enjoyed enduring international popularity. It is also a very popular choice for school and community productions. Background: Fiddler on the Roof is based on Tevi and his daughters, a series of stories by Sholem Aleichem that he wrote in Yiddish between 1894 and 1914, and is also influenced by Life is with People, by Mark Z. Borofsky and Elizabeth Herzog. Aleichem wrote a dramatic adaptation of the stories that he left unfinished at his death, but which was produced in Yiddish in 1919 by the Yiddish Art Theatre and made into a film in the 1930s. In the late 1950s, a musical based on the stories, called Tevi and His Daughters, was produced off-Broadway by Arnold Pearl, Rodgers and Hammerstein, and then Mike Todd briefly considered bringing the musical to Broadway but dropped the idea. Investors and some in the media worried that the show might be considered too Jewish to attract mainstream audiences. Other critics considered that it was too culturally sanitized, middle-brow, and superficial. Philip Roth, writing in The New Yorker, called it shtetl-kitsch. For example, it portrays the characters of the local Russian officer and Fiddler as sympathetic, instead of brutal and cruel, as Sholem Aleichem had described them. Aleichem's stories ended with Tevi alone, his wife dead, and his daughters scattered. In Fiddler, the family ends up together, emigrating with hope to America. The show found the right balance for its time, even if not entirely authentic, to become one of the first popular post-Holocaust depictions of the vanished world of Eastern European Jewry. Harold Prince replaced the original producer Fred Coe and brought in director, choreographer Jerome Robbins. The writers and Robbins considered naming the musical Tevi, before landing on a title suggested by various paintings by Marc Chagall that also inspired the original set design. Contrary to popular belief, the title of the musical does not refer to any specific painting. During rehearsals, one of the stars, Zero Mostel, feuded with Robbins, for whom he had contempt because Robbins had testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee and was a closeted Jew, while Mostel was publicly proud of his heritage. Other cast members also had run-ins with Robbins, who reportedly abused the cast, drove the designers crazy, and strained the good nature of Hal Prince. Synopsis: Act 1 Tevi, a poor Jewish milkman with 5 daughters, explains the customs of the Jews in the Russian shtetl of Anatevka in 1905, where their lives are as precarious as the perch of a fiddler on a roof. At Tevi's home, everyone is busy preparing for the Sabbath meal. His sharp-tongued wife, Golda, orders their daughters, Zeitel, Hodel, Hava, Shiprinza and Bielka, about their tasks. Yenta, the village matchmaker, arrives to tell Golda that Lazar Wolf, the wealthy butcher, a widower older than Tevi, wants to wed Zeitel, the eldest daughter. The next two daughters, Hodel and Hava, are excited about Jent's visit, but Zeitel is unenthusiastic. A girl from a poor family must take whatever husband Jenta brings, but Zeitel wants to marry her childhood friend, Motel the tailor. Tevi is delivering milk, pulling the cart to himself, as his horse is lame. He asks God, whom would it hurt if I were a rich man? Avram, the bookseller, has news from the outside world about pogroms and expulsions. A stranger, Perchik, hears their conversation and scolds them for doing nothing more than talk. The men dismiss Perchik as a radical, but Tevi invites him home for the Sabbath meal and offers him food and a room in exchange for tutoring his two youngest daughters. Golda tells Tevi to meet Lazar after the Sabbath but does not tell him why, knowing that Tevi does not like Lazar. Zeitel is afraid that Jenta will find her a husband before Motel asks Tevi for her hand, but Motel resists. He is afraid of Tevi's temper, and tradition says that a matchmaker arranges marriages. Motel is also very poor and is saving up to buy a sewing machine before he approaches Tevi, to show that he can support a wife. The family gathers for the Sabbath prayer. After the Sabbath, Tevi meets Lazar at Mordechai's inn, assuming mistakenly that Lazar wants to buy his cow. Once the misunderstanding is cleared up, Tevi agrees to let Lazar marry Zeitel, with a rich butcher. His daughter will never want for anything. All join in the celebration of Lazar's good fortune. Even the Russian youths at the inn join in the celebration and show off their dancing skills. Outside the inn, Tevi happens upon the Russian constable, who has jurisdiction over the Jews in the town. The constable warns him that there is going to be a little unofficial demonstration in the coming weeks. The constable has sympathy for the Jewish community but is powerless to prevent the violence. The next morning, after Perchik's lessons with her young sisters, Tevi's second daughter Hodel mocks Perchik's Marxist interpretation of a Bible story. He, in turn, criticizes her for hanging on to the old traditions of Judaism, noting that the world is changing. To illustrate this, he dances with her, defying the prohibition against opposite sexes dancing together. The two begin to fall in love. Later, a hungover Tevi announces that he has agreed that Zeitel will marry Lazar Wolf. Golda is overjoyed, but Zeitel is devastated and begs Tevi not to force her. Motel arrives and tells Tevi that he is the perfect match for Zeitel and that he and Zeitel gave each other a pledge to marry. He promises that Zeitel will not starve as his wife. Tevi is stunned and outraged at this breach of tradition, but impressed at the timid tailor's display of backbone. After some soul-searching, Tevi agrees to let them marry, but he worries about how to break the news to Golda. An overjoyed Motel celebrates with Zeitel. In bed with Golda, Tevi pretends to be waking from a nightmare. Golda offers to interpret his dream, and Tevi describes it. Gold's grandmother Zeitel returns from the grave to bless the marriage of her namesake, but to Motel, not to Lazar Wolf. Lazar's formidable late wife, Fruma Sarah, rises from her grave to warn, in graphic terms, of severe retribution if Zeitel marries Lazar. The superstitious Golda is terrified, and she quickly counsels that Zeitel must marry Motel. While returning from town, Tevi's third daughter, the bookish Hava, is teased and intimidated by some Russian youths, but one of them, Fiddler, protects her, dismissing the others. He offers Hava the loan of a book, and a secret relationship begins. The wedding day of Zeitel and Motel arrives, and all the Jews join the ceremony and the celebration. Lazar gives a fine gift, but an argument arises with Tevi over the broken agreement. Perchik ends the tiff by breaking another tradition. He crosses the barrier between the men and women to dance with Tevi's daughter Hodel. The celebration ends abruptly when a group of Russians rides into the village to perform their demonstration. They disrupt the party, damaging the wedding gifts and wounding Perchik, who attempts to fight back and wreak more destruction in the village. Tevi instructs his family to clean up the mess. Act 2. Months later, Perchik tells Hodel he must return to Kiev to work for the revolution. He proposes marriage, admitting that he loves her, and says that he will send for her. She agrees. They tell Tevi that they're engaged, and he is appalled that they're flouting tradition by making their own match, especially as Perchik is leaving. When he forbids the marriage, Perchik and Hodel inform him that they do not seek his permission, only his blessing. After more soul-searching, Tevi relents. The world is changing, and he must change with it. He informs the young couple that he gives them his blessing and his permission. Tevi explains these events to an astonished Golda. Love, he says, it's the new style. Tevi asks Golda, despite their own arranged marriage, do you love me? After dismissing Tevi's question as foolish, she eventually admits that, after 25 years of living and struggling together and raising 5 daughters, she does. Meanwhile, Yenta tells Zeitel that she saw Hava with Fiddler. News spreads quickly in Anatevka that Perchik has been arrested and exiled to Siberia, and Hodel is determined to join him there. At the railway station, she explains to her father that her home is with her beloved, wherever he may be, although she will always love her family. Time passes. Motel U has purchased a used sewing machine, and he and Zeitel have had a baby. Hava finally gathers the courage to ask Tevi to allow her marriage to Fiddler. Again Tevi reaches deep into his soul, but marriage outside the Jewish faith is a line he will not cross. He forbids Hava to speak to Fiddler again. When Golda brings news that Hava has eloped with Fiddler, Tevi wonders where he went wrong. Hava returns and tries to reason with him, but he refuses to speak to her and tells the rest of the family to consider her dead. Meanwhile, rumors are spreading of the Russians speaking Jews from their villages. While the villagers are gathered, the constable arrives to tell everyone that they have 3 days to pack up and leave the town. In shock, they reminisce about Anatevka, and how hard it will be to leave what has been their home for so long. As the Jews leave Anatevka, Hava and Fiddler stop to tell her family that they are also leaving for Krakow. Unwilling to remain among the people who could do such things to others, Tevi still will not talk to her, but when Zeitel says goodbye to Hava, Tevi prompts her to add God be with you. Motel and Zeitel go to Poland as well, but will join the rest of the family when they have saved up enough money. As Tevi, Golda and their 2 youngest daughters leave the village for America, the fiddler begins to play. Tevi beckons with a nod, and the fiddler follows them out of the village. Musical numbers. The 2004 revival featured a song sung by Yenta and some women of the village titled Topsy Turvy, discussing the disappearing role of the matchmaker in society. The number replaced the rumor I just heard. Principal characters. All of the characters are Jewish, except as noted. Tevi, a poor milkman with 5 daughters, a firm supporter of the traditions of his faith. He finds many of his convictions tested by the actions of his 3 oldest daughters. Golda, Tevi's sharp-tongued wife. Zeitel, their oldest daughter, about 19. She loves childhood friend Motel and marries him, even though he's poor, begging her father not to force her to marry Lazar Wolf. Hodel, their daughter, about 17. Intelligent and spirited, she falls in love with Perchik and later joins him in Siberia. Hava, their daughter, about 15. A shy book lover, who falls in love with Fiddler. Shaprinza, their daughter, about 12. Bielka, their youngest daughter, about 9. Motel Kamzoil, a poor but hard-working tailor who loves, and later marries, Zeitel. Perchik, a scholar and Bolshevik revolutionary who comes to Anatevka and falls in love with Hodel. He leaves for Kiev and is exiled to Siberia. Fiddler, a young Christian man. He shares Chava's passion for reading and is outraged by the Russians' treatment of the Jews. Lazar Wolf, the wealthy village butcher. widower of Fru Masera, attempts to arrange a marriage for himself to Zeitel. Yenta, the gossipy village matchmaker who matches Zeitel and Lazar. Fru Masera, Lazar, Wolfstead wife, who rises from the grave in Tevi's Nightmare. Grandma Zeitel, Goldstead grandmother, also featured in the Nightmare. Mordsha, the innkeeper. Rabbi, the wise village rabbi. Constable, a Christian man, the head of the local Russian police.